What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. Got Leviticus chapter 8 lined up for right now, and we're finally done with all the stuff about offerings. Only took 7 chapters. But anyway, as you can see from the little subsection heading thing here, we're finally getting into the ordination of Aaron and his sons. I guess there was mention of this a little bit in, God talking to Moses, telling him what had to be done for this ceremony, but I guess now all these chapters later, it's actually happening. So anyway, alrighty, here we go. Leviticus chapter 8. The Lord said to Moses, "Bring Aaron and his sons, their garments, the anointing oil, the bowl for the sin offering, the 2 rams, and the basket containing bread made without yeast, and gather the entire assembly at the entrance to the tent of meeting." Moses did as the Lord commanded him, and the assembly gathered at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Okay, so tent of meeting is like lowercase, also not worded tabernacle here, which means this may be like the other tent of meeting that Moses had kind of used before the tabernacle was established. Maybe? I don't know. Anyway. Or it could have just been at the tabernacle anyway, and it just went with this wording this time. I don't know. Quick footnote mention here. Rather than sin offering, it could also be purification offering. It just depends on how you translate it and whether it's looking more at the positive or the negative aspect of it, you might say. Because the sin offering is like, okay, here's what we're trying to make up for, atone for, or whatever. And like, purification offering is worded more as like, okay, here's what we're trying to do with this offering. Rather than what we're trying to get rid of. But anyway. Alrighty. Moving along to verse 5. Moses said to the assembly, "This is what the Lord has commanded to be done." Then Moses brought Aaron and his sons forward and washed them with water. He put the tunic on Aaron, tied the sash around him, clothed him with the robe, and put the ephod on him. He also fastened the ephod with a decorative waistband, which he tied around him. He placed the breastplate on him and put the Urim and Thummim in the breastpiece. Then he placed the turban on Aaron's head and set the gold plate, sacred emblem, on front of it, as the Lord commanded Moses. Okay, so, yeah. Again, some of these things are kind of getting into, or kind of going back over things that we previously read. I guess it would have been towards the end of Exodus, but it's, as it has done with previous things, now it's kind of saying, okay, Moses was given these commands before for how this was supposed to be done, and now it's actually happening. So everybody was gathered around for this like ordination ceremony, and it starts off with Moses washing Aaron and his sons with water to, like, again, help clean them because they were supposed to be pure in more ways than one. I think, when serving in the tabernacle. So this was kind of the first ceremonial cleansing to make sure that they were purified and ready officially for service. And then he starts putting all of Aaron's specific, priestly garments and stuff on him, and, making sure that all fits and is, fastened correctly. and that it's all seen by the people so they can maybe know what he looks like with all this stuff on. Anyway, then I suppose we move on to verse 10. Then Moses took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle and everything in it, and so consecrated them. He sprinkled some of the oil on the altar 7 times, anointing the altar and all its utensils and the basin with its stand to consecrate them. He poured some of the anointing oil on Aaron's head and anointed him to consecrate him. Then he brought Aaron's sons forward, put tunics on them, tied sashes around them, and fastened caps on them, as the Lord commanded Moses. I don't remember reading anything in the previous commands and whatnot about, the other priests wearing particular caps or anything, but, sure, whatever. I imagine these caps might have been somewhat similar to the turban for Aaron, except probably smaller and, without, the emblem thing on the front of it. Also, tabernacle in lowercase here. I feel like it's often been uppercase when talking about it before. Is that just me? Am I just remembering things incorrectly? I don't know. Anyway. So a lot of the anointing going on in this little subsection. And then we get into verse 14. He then presented the bull for the sin offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head. Moses slaughtered the bull and took some of the blood, and with his finger he put it on all the horns of the altar to purify the altar. He poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. So he consecrated it to make atonement for it. Moses also took all the fat around the internal organs, the long lobe of the liver, and both kidneys and their fat, and burned it on the altar. But the bull with its hide and its flesh and its intestines he burned up outside the camp, as the Lord commanded Moses. Okay, so we have the slaughtering of the bull. I just find the wording here interesting, saying he consecrated it to make atonement for it. It being the bull, I would kind of assume. Or maybe the altar. Because, the previous directions were talking about the altar, and given that the sentence here starts with the word so, it kind of almost makes reference back to those previous actions. But I guess that rather than, using the oil as he did with the previous items related to the tabernacle, maybe this was just kind of the process for the altar, since it was supposed to be used for, the offerings and stuff anyway. Anyway. Okay. Moving on to verse 18. He then presented the ram for the burnt offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head. Then Moses slaughtered the ram and splashed the blood against the sides of the altar. He cut the ram into pieces and burned the head, the pieces, and the fat. He washed the internal organs and the legs with water and burned the whole ram on the altar. It was a burnt offering, a pleasing aroma, a food offering presented to the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses. See, okay, before when it was talking about the various offerings and things like that, it didn't usually have, this combination of all these different kind of descriptions of what was going on with the offering. I remember seeing, burnt offering, pleasing aroma, but not necessarily also food offering, like these little subdivisions or different descriptions of the different types of offerings, I guess. Like, maybe they were used in the previous chapters to kind of point out some commonalities between the different types of offerings, especially talking about the phrases like pleasing aroma or food offering or different things like that. Because, like, you'd find sometimes just one of those, sometimes the other. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking through what might have been going on there, because I was trying to understand why, for some of those different types of offerings, it would have repeated those phrases as frequently as it did. But anyway, that's just me thinking through it. If anybody knows better, feel free to, add the corresponding information and let me know. But, okay, so there was a bull for the sin offering, and then there was a ram for a burnt offering. And it seems there's more offering to go, which, makes sense for such a significant event as, ordination of priests. I'm sure if we went back and looked at all that it would say that those things were all necessary for this procedure. Anyway, okay. Moving along to verse 22. This is a fairly long section here, but I'm just going to get right through it and then kind of break down my thoughts. So, verse 22. He then presented the other ram, the ram for the ordination, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head. Moses slaughtered the ram and took some of its blood and put it on the lobe of Aaron's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Moses also brought Aaron's sons forward and put some of the blood on the lobes of their right ears, on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet. Then he splashed blood against the sides of the altar. After that, he took the fat tail, and the fat around the internal organs, the long lobe of the liver, both kidneys and their fat, and the right thigh. And from the basket of bread made without yeast, which was before the Lord, he took one thick loaf with olive oil mixed in, and one thin loaf, and he put these on the fat portions and on the right thigh. He put all these in the hands of Aaron and his sons, and they waved them before the Lord as a wave offering. Then Moses took them from their hands and burned them on the altar on top of the burnt offering as an ordination offering, a pleasing aroma, a food offering presented to the Lord. Moses also took the breast, which was his share of the ordination ram, and waved it before the Lord as a wave offering, as the Lord commanded Moses. Okay, so I don't remember the whole wave offering thing when it was previously mentioned applying to anything more than just the breast of the animal in question. And yet, this mentions that being done for seemingly some of the bread, the fat portions, the thigh possibly. Like, it seems like there's a whole lot more that's being, waved in this case than what was mentioned before. Which, not like it is a bad thing necessarily to do that for more pieces of the offering. I'm just trying to figure out what the significance of the wave is then, and I really don't know. Although it mentions Moses waving the breast, so maybe, given that these are also food offerings, like, because it specifically mentions the breast as like Moses' portion in this, or his share of the ram. So maybe those portions were supposed to specifically be eaten then by the priests and Moses in the case of the one piece. But anyway, so we've had the sin offering, which obviously is supposed to be done as, like atonement / purification for the sins of the priests. The burnt offering, I'm not totally sure the particular function of that relative to the whole ceremony. I guess other than that all was supposed to get burned as like an additional offering or something. Although it says that's a food offering too. So, again, I'm not totally sure of all the different details and what's being described or why certain things are being described in certain ways. But anyway, the burnt offering was, at the very least, to have some sort of additional offering going into the whole ceremony. I guess possibly, involving food stuff. But anyway, the second ram, it states it out right there, is for the ordination. So each of these animals, even though I'm not necessarily totally sure on the purpose behind the burnt offering, it seems pretty clear that there was some particular kind of purpose to each of these animals and these offerings within this whole ceremony. So anyway, otherwise there was just blood being put on different parts of the priests, almost similar to how you'd, think of a pact being made or, different things like that. It's like, all right, here's this mark, in blood saying that, you are taking on this responsibility, that you're coming into this agreement to serve God in this way, and it's something of that nature, I'd imagine. But anyway, okay. Moving on to verse 30, I think I'm going to read through the rest of the chapter and then kind of wrap things up there. So, verse 30. Then Moses took some of the anointing oil and some of the blood from the altar and sprinkled them on Aaron and his garments and on his sons and their garments. So he consecrated Aaron and his garments and his sons and their garments. Moses then said to Aaron and his sons, "Cook the meat at the entrance to the tent of meeting and eat it there with the bread from the basket of ordination offerings. As I was commanded, Aaron and his sons are to eat it. Then burn up the rest of the meat and the bread. Do not leave the entrance to the tent of meeting for 7 days until the days of your ordination are completed, for your ordination will last 7 days. What has been done today was commanded by the Lord to make atonement for you. You must stay at the entrance to the tent of meeting day and night for 7 days and do what the Lord requires, so you will not die. For that is what I have been commanded." So Aaron and his sons did everything the Lord commanded through Moses. So, as part of the, initiation, you might say, into the priesthood. Now, I don't know if this was a one-time thing or if this was like, forever and always whenever new priests were ordained. But at the very least in this case, they were supposed to stay at the entrance to the tent of meeting for a week. I guess, part of the idea behind that might be, all right, let's have you spend a bunch of time here in the place you will be serving to, get familiar with it, and possibly because it was a significant kind of sacred space in a way, get yourselves in tune with God's spirit, his will, and, just getting a greater sense of God's presence. So anyway, it mentions cooking the meat, so whether this was the meat specifically mentioned in the offering portions, or maybe it was the other meat, I'm still a little bit unclear on that, but anyway, portions of those animals from the offerings would have gone to Aaron and his sons for them to eat. I would imagine they got more food than that for later on in this week-long, initiation period. Or at least, I don't know, maybe I'm just assuming that based on previous, commands and verses that we read talking about, not keeping food from these offerings for more than, depending on which type of offering, either just 1 day or 2 days. So I was kind of assuming, at least based on that, the food from this ceremony, or at least the first day of it, would have just been eaten on that day, and whatever was left over from that day would have been burned, and maybe even do it all over again over the remaining days in that week. I'm not totally sure on that part, but for something like this, that kind of makes sense to me. However it happened, I would imagine they got other sources of food throughout that week. But anyway, okay, I'm just digressing and rambling on about the same kind of point. So, I suppose that will do it for now with chapter 8. Alright, so that's going to do it for Leviticus 8. We basically had Aaron and his sons ordained as priests and just about ready to start their duties in those roles. There's one more thing that's going to happen first, but we'll get to that next chapter. So anyway, that's going to do it for now. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description to get info on social media pages and how to find and follow all that. And leave comments down below with any thoughts you have. So that's it. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you next time. But until then, stay cool, people.